All right, and welcome everyone to the Back Again podcast ranking episode. As always, I'm Matt.
I'm Drew.
And this is our ranking episode. We did the impossible this season. We watched 12 action movie sequels. 12. Some great, some not so great. And it's that time again where we get together and we discuss which was the worst and which was the best. And as far as these rankings go, I mean, when we judge the movies throughout the season, we ask 3 questions, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to use those same 3 questions to rank these movies, right? And I'll make a guess right now, and I'm going to make a guess about how we're each going to rank this, and then I'll tell you at the end of the ranking if I got it right or if I got it wrong.
Okay, that's cool.
All right, and let's jump into the ranking of Season 2 of the Back Again podcast, which was action movie sequels. At number 12, and in last place...
Okay, I don't think it's going to be a shock to anyone that my number 12 is Escape from LA.
And my number 12 is also Escape from LA.
All right. And we're off to the races with Kurt Russell on the fucking wave.
And I don't think it's a surprise because if you go back to that episode and you listen to it, we even say, or I think I even say it and then you agree, which is, I think this is going to be the worst sequel we do on this list.
Oh, you were right.
And sure enough, when we get to this ranking episode, it is in fact the worst episode that we did, or it is in fact the worst sequel we did on this list for sure.
What made it so bad?
I think it was a combination of laziness and true boring. Like that movie was really boring when it should have been a lot more fun.
For me, it boiled down to the director, John Carpenter. It just seemed like he didn't understand at all why the first one, Escape from New York, was successful, because it's insane how you can have like a good movie, an all-around solid movie. I didn't love it, but an all-around solid movie like Escape from New York. And then you can have something that is so redundant, that is so copy and paste of that movie, and still like come out so sour.
I think it's the perfect example of what makes sequels bad for this podcast. It got X's in all the categories. And it's I think with whatever we decide number 1 is as like the best example for this podcast, this is by far like it's the best by being the worst example. I'm saying this wrong. It's the best example of being the worst kind of sequel.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, so that's our number 12. So number 11, and you started off the last one, so I'll start off this one. Mine is Another 48 Hours.
Ooh, okay.
This movie, very similar to Escape from LA, where it is repeating the same beats from the first movie. It was also very boring. However, the difference between this one and Escape from LA was there were still some entertaining moments, I guess, of just like dialogue between characters. I think you referenced like Eddie Murphy in the bathroom with the knife and like a girl.
That whole bar sequence.
Yeah, the whole bar, for sure. And it did fill the gap a little bit of being kind of entertaining because it was so bad, just because you get to like be like, I guess Nick Nolte hasn't changed. Like, you know, where's his girlfriend? She's gone, you know? So it was, and also the whole thing with the Iceman, like how he shoots him and there's no gun.
Yeah.
And like the whole thing explodes. If there was no Escape from LA, this would probably be the worst sequel. So that's my number 11. What's your number 11?
My number 11 is Tomb Raider.
Oh.
Cradle of Life. The big one for me for why it places so low is because, and we talked about it when we ranked this episode, it had so much potential. Even though the first one, I think, had a big misstep. Like I said, I was, or at least at the time, I would have been excited to see what they did with the sequel. And they just have her punching a shark. Like, you can say things are ridiculous, like, and you can, like, show clips of it happening, but then you can also be in, like, the context of a movie. And you're like, I'm watching a big-budget movie starring Angelina Jolie. And then out of nowhere, because there's no build-up to it, she punches a shark. And this is, like, just the perfect example. The whole movie is filled with little, like, instances of this. It's filled with, I think, the most toothless villain. And for, you know, like, action movie sequels, you gotta have a decent villain at least. Another big thing I can ding it on is just being forgettable. I can remember all the beats, but as far as like any emotional weight, I just immediately think of the first one. That was the only time that there was any emotional weight to the character of the story.
I think that episode only got 1 check, right?
I do not remember, but I can believe it. Yeah, that sounds like a 1 check movie for sure.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to number 10, and you can start off this one since I just won the last one.
I'll start off number 10, Matt. Number 10 is, for me, Too Fast, Too Furious.
Wow.
This got a little higher up on the list because I think it places a little bit more in the campy side of things. But so it's kind of in that so bad it's good category that I don't think a lot of these sequels got into. But at the end of the day, I want to feel like I'm watching a unique action movie when I'm watching something like the Fast and the Furious franchise, because that's what it is, or that's what it kind of presents itself as like an action movie franchise with like a twist. It's all about like the cars and the driving, but it really doesn't get there until, what did we say when we were talking about it? Like number 5. So like I like the franchise, or I believe I would like the franchise. I honestly haven't seen any besides the first 2, but it's just like insane character decisions. And the big thing we talked about that really kind of doesn't work is the intensity the director was trying to bring to like the dialogue scenes, and then the way that dialogue was written. The action is fine. It's actually pretty decent. And like we said, a lot of the side characters are good. But any movie, protagonist is priority number 1, except for maybe the plot. And this one had a shady plot as far as quality goes, and the characters were well portrayed but not well written.
Yeah. No, I can understand why that's like up on your list. My number 10 is going to be Rambo 2.
Ooh.
I know. Now, believe it or not, if you remember, I told you at the top of this list that I'm kind of making these decisions off of the rules of the podcast, right?
That's fine.
And my biggest problem with Rambo 2, and the reason why it's number 10, is because it completely undercuts the character progression of Rambo.
In what way?
We end the first Rambo with a therapy session, and he's finally going to get his help. And we open the second movie on him in prison, okay? And then they say, you're going back to Vietnam.
What, did he go to prison for what happened in the first movie, or did he go to therapy and then go to prison for something that happened later?
And it's great that you bring that up, because when you just talked about potential with Lara Croft, this movie had great potential. And we brought up the fact that James Cameron wrote the original screenplay, and then Sylvester Stallone kind of wrote over it. So he made it a really dumb, generic action sequel. And when you think about the contribution to action movies, and you think about the contribution to sequels in general, I mean, Rambo 2 is a perfect example of just like, this is all we got to do. This is all the people want to see. And it's like, no, we wanted to see more character stuff. So for me, it's a overall entertaining movie. But as far as like a sequel ranking list goes, and like my enjoyment in watching it under that kind of scope, it's on the weaker side. So that's my number 10. All right, so let's move on to number 9. I'm going to take this one, and my number 9 is actually Lara Croft Tomb Raider,
okay.
Cradle of Life. I understand why you made it your number 11 because of the potential, like we were just talking about. But for me, the reason why this is a better movie than like Rambo 2 and then the other 2 crappy ones I just talked about is it actually is a continuation of the character. They just don't know what to do with her.
They're trying.
They tried because...
God help them, they're trying.
They don't know how to write her character without a male crux.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? But it still is a true continuation of the character, and the fact that they gave us a bigger world. Now, the reason why it's still lower on the list is because it's a boring freaking movie. And whatever they're searching for is not interesting, and it's just explanation upon explanation of a map to a map. But I think in general, like it works as a sequel. You know, it wasn't enjoyable / entertaining, and there are some ridiculous things that you really laugh at, like the shark punch, or like the motorcycle on the Great Wall of China.
Oh, Jesus, I forgot about that.
And honestly, it gets a couple points up above Rambo 2 and stuff because of Gerard Butler. So,
oh my God.
That's my number 9.
I don't like bringing up a repeat for my number 9 as well, but my number 9 is going to be Another 48 Hours. Higher on the list because, honestly, just Eddie Murphy. Like I said, there's a handful of like truly... I think this is the first movie on the list that I think has like truly enjoyable scenes, even though it can't bring itself together. It's also the other one that like it doesn't kind of leave anything open. Like I said, if they do something stupid or lazy, they at least have like a character comment on it, or there's some kind of wink hidden in the direction or the writing or the performance or something, or at least for anything obvious. I feel like everything else had obvious shortcomings. This one at least felt like it was complete. I feel like we already talked about it a good amount when you placed it on the list. The only thing I would say is, or the only thing I'd add to it is, oh man, it is at the end of the day, it is just so forgettable.
Yeah, I get that. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to number 8.
Number 8 for me is going to be Charlie's Angels 2, Full Throttle. Boy, oh boy, This one I think kind of suffers the same curse as Lara Croft, where the first one is so good, so when the sequel ends up being so not necessarily bad, because we're on number 8 right now, we're in kind of like the middle ground. I would feel like the lower half of the middle ground. But yeah, it's just such a letdown. I remember particularly Lucy Liu's character. I can't remember. She was one of my favorite characters in the first one, and they just did nothing with her in the sequel.
Yeah.
They did the exact same thing they did in the first one. So it suffers that curse of redundancy that we see in Escape from New York or Another 48 Hours. But again, there's at least a little bit of effort to kind of like hide that they're just kind of copying the first movie's idea. And then, what, they have like 3 villains?
Yeah, they introduced that theme of like 2 to 3 new villains.
Yeah, and then they have, at the end of the day, the only really good... Again, like I said, there's always at least a handful of scenes that are good from like this point up. I really like the Crispin Glover
Yeah.
flashback scenes with Carrie Fisher. A handful of nice moments, a lot of characters being squandered that we liked from the first one, a lot of plot redundancy. I think the bare minimum is done to kind of cover it, but that's kind of why it's not placed too well for me.
Yeah. You'll see soon that I slightly agree with that, mostly agree with that, but just slightly in a second. But my number 8...
Just slightly, but mostly.
Yeah. But my number 8 is going to be Too Fast, Too Furious.
All right.
I actually was going back and forth on my 8 and 7, but my main decision on why putting this at 8 was because it does continue the world of Brian O'Connor, and it has a strong front half, I would say. But then the movie kind of shifts just into another kind of like getaway heist movie, and it kind of abandons the whole street racing. Like they still keep some of those elements in, but it's more focused on kind of creating a new subworld of the racing world, and almost kind of maybe doing sequels with these new characters that we're meeting. We get Tyrese, we get Ludacris. The bad guys kind of throwaway, but they even set it up to where he could return in the future. So,
but he never does.
He never does. But it's got that kind of feeling to where it's like, okay, this is a sequel, but this is also its own movie, right? And on top of that, it's enjoyable and it's fun, but it's also taking itself like really seriously with the type of arguments that they're having within the movie. So for me, it's in the middle of this kind of list, but it's still kind of lower up. So that's going to be our number 8. So let's move on to number 7. And now this is where I'm going to slightly agree with you, because my number 7 is Charlie's Angels, Full Throttle.
Okay.
And originally I had Charlie's Angels at 8 and Too Fast, Too Furious at 7, but I switched them mainly because, like you said, I remembered a lot of those funny scenes, like with Crispin Glover.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And also there's some good fight scenes as well within that second one. And I just think I enjoy the characters more. I like the Angels more than I like, the characters in these other sequels or in these other franchises, right? They introduce the whole multiple bad guys, and they do these like obvious double crosses that you see a mile away, but it's almost like really funny how they do it because they wink at it. They go like, "We did it, partner!" And then
but they
bang,
do
bang.
it better in the first one when Sam Rockwell's character betrays her.
They do it way better in the first one, and there are repeated beats in the second one, but there still is funny moments, and it's like a high energy movie. You know what I mean? So just within the ranking of this, it just gets the bump because it's like, if you're not paying attention, you might still really like it. But if you're paying attention...
that's a great way to describe this movie. If you're not paying attention, you'll probably really enjoy it.
Well, the characters and the performances are fun, but they just kind of double down on the whole Drew Barrymore thing again, and it becomes redundant, like you said. So, like I said, it stays in the middle. It's not very high up in the middle, but that's my number 7.
My number 7 is going to be Die Hard 2. Really middle of the road. This is the one that I think at 7 it kind of starts getting like more watchable, like at the kind of like I would recommend it, but just barely, because we got our character back. He is well written, and the stakes are higher. And I know I just kept harping on this when we were doing that review, but like that's really all you need. And by God, they do it. So like, even though everything else sucks, the side characters, like the side arcs that are happening, like with the shit happening on the plane.
Mm-hmm.
And the reporter, I think, just ends up doing the exact same thing he does in the first one. Villain, I don't remember. He had the military in his pocket somehow. Never really figured out how that happened. But yeah, fuck all that shit. Like, you've got John McClane. He's back, and the stakes have never been higher, technically. So that's really all that needs to be said about that, I feel like.
All right, well, let's move on to our number 6.
Number 6 for me, I think, is going to be Rambo 2. I place it a little bit higher.
So you think Rambo 2 is better than Die Hard 2?
Yes, because we still have our character. We have Rambo. He's well written, even though the script suffers for it, if that makes sense, or the plot suffers for it. 2, you have higher stakes, and then 3, you have the little cherry on top, which is it's the perfect scenario for a character like him. It's not necessarily like the place that someone who actually cares about character would want to see him. Like, I mean, you and me both wanted to see like something a little bit more like,
Yeah, we want to see a clever way to get him to kill again, but it's
yeah,
a struggle for him.
But like, if you're going to go just like the dumb action movie sequel, like obvious route, this was the best option they could have done, and they just lean into it to a fault, which is why it still places kind of low. But at least they like, we're getting to the point where we're not getting enjoyable, but we're getting like competent. Like, they know what they're doing. So like, I see that with Die Hard 2, and then I see it here with Rambo 2. This one, they just have a little bit more of the gears turning. Even though I wouldn't say it's as strong as Die Hard 2. I think Die Hard 2 and Rambo 2 are pretty tied up there for like really, really just like competent. Not barely competent, like solidly competent, but not necessarily enjoyable.
Yeah. Rambo 2 is a sequel that only works because the characters are enabling Rambo's flaws.
Exactly, yeah. So it's like, when you actually sit down and think about it, you're like, oh, this is not a good movie. This movie actually makes me feel kind of gross.
I feel bad for Rambo. So, believe it or not, my number 6 is actually going to be Drunken Master 2.
Ooh, that's down there for you.
I know. So let's get some good stuff out of the way, right? It's some of the best choreography you're ever going to see, and Jackie Chan is amazing, fantastic. And just as a filmmaking kind of note, this is like what you should be watching if you want to make stuff like in the world, because this is great filmmaking as far as choreography and comedy to a certain extent, right? But the reason why it's at number 6 is because, one, it is not a sequel.
That's true.
So I cannot, in good conscience, in the ranking of the sequel podcast, season 2, put it in the top 5, right? Yeah, it's an enjoyable movie, and it's entertaining, and it's a good follow-up to the Drunken Master style and to this character, because he has the same name. But no, I can't go in the top 5 because it's not a sequel, and it's just like, there was things I liked about the first one that were good in the second one, but I wish they carried over more into the second one. So that's my number 6. So now here we go. All right, we went from 12 to 6, and now it's time for our top 5. And let's start it off with number 5. And my number 5 is going to be Bad Boys 2. I think this is a fair number 5. It's a good continuation of the characters. It's a bigger world. They introduce new characters that are also like not bad. It's enjoyable, entertaining, and yeah, this is an action movie. But the reason why it doesn't break like the top 3 is because it's directed by Michael Bay, and this movie is just like edited crazy, and there's so much shaky cam, and the fights are cool, and some of the camera work within the fights is cool, but you can't really follow what's going on, and like spatial awareness in this movie is just like, hey Michael, what's going on? He's like, bullets. They're everywhere. Just point the camera. You're fired. There's a lot of great stuff in this sequel, and I think it's a good example of a good sequel, especially in the action genre. I just wish it was directed a little bit smoother, and it was a little less saturated. It's a very shiny Miami movie like Transporter 2, but it's still top 5 material. So that's going to be my number 5.
It's funny that you mentioned Transporter 2, because my number 5 is going to be Transporter 2.
All right.
Or, as I would like to call it, Transport to the Transporter. What to say about Transporter 2? I am the cure. I mean, there's just like so much. It is fun. It is bright. It is good action, but it doesn't necessarily reach the peaks that, honestly, I think movies like Die Hard and Rambo hit, Die Hard 2 and Rambo 2 hit.
You still had it ranked higher.
I have it ranked higher because it has more gears turning. It's competent on more levels. There's only really like because now we're getting to movies that are like mostly good. Rambo 2 and like Die Hard 2 I think are like half good. Like this one, there's only like a handful of scenes that are like when she shoots the helicopter and it explodes. But like yeah, like even down to like you have like the really good henchman character, you have the smart callbacks, not just the dumb callbacks, the expansion of side characters with that detective friend that he has, a smart twist on he's a chauffeur now for like a small child. There's just more going on. And so maybe it just seems more competent than it is. Maybe it is actually technically worse than like Die Hard or Rambo. But it is juggling more balls, and that is makes it more enjoyable for me because it's just more balanced.
Let's move on to number 4.
My number 4 is going to be Drunken Master 2. I mean, yes, what you said about the choreography is like a big part of why it ranks so high for me. Why it ranks a little bit higher is because I am two reasons. One, I'm less beholden to it not being a sequel. Because it's not like it's a completely different movie. It's still the same character at the very least. He's just a little bit older now. And the other big reason I was gonna say the side characters, but it might just end up being the stepmom.
Yeah.
It's honestly hard to tell if it is inconsistent character or if her character is just so dynamic. Yeah. Because it's like she is just all over the place with like completely, just her complete devotion to Jackie Chan, like her stepson, and like her complete just lying to her husband potentially about being pregnant and never resolving it. And like the sequence where she's like helping him drink while he's doing like the kung fu or the drunken master style. I wouldn't go so far as to say the comedy elevates it, even though it is technically an action comedy, but it's like those character dynamics that kind of stem from the comedy or like the need for the comedy, because like the jokes I think kind of fall flat because of language barrier and like the not necessarily super well done dub, even though this one was much better than the first one. But when you have just those unique characters, and I don't want to say quirks, but like they're interesting motives because they're trying to be spawned out of comedy, if that makes sense. Like the writer is trying to throw a comedy angle on it, and so they're developing interesting characters by trying to make them comedic, even though the jokes aren't necessarily translating. Mm-hmm. It just was like interesting to see, and I think that kind of like elevated it a little bit more into number 4 for me.
Yeah. My number 4, believe it or not, is Die Hard 2.
Wow, that's high up there.
And the reason why this gets into the top 5 is because I do recognize that it is a cash grab. The first one's extremely successful. I'm not going to fault it on being a follow-up to Die Hard because it's like you never know when like a movie's going to be that kind of big. So it has a lot going against it right off the bat. And for the most part, it's still it's still the best Die Hard sequel in the franchise. And you probably could have just had Die Hard 2 and just be another wacky kind of follow-up and would have played fine. The reason like it goes above for me like Bad Boys 2 is because I think it's directed better. It's smoother. The action's good. There's things within the bad guys that don't make sense, like of how they know each other, but the bad guys are still at least like bigger and more threatening. I do like the fact that they take over the airport and they're like crashing planes, and it's like a real threat. If they could have just held back on one less line of dialogue that references the first movie, right? It was how can the same shit happen to the same guy twice? You take out that line and this goes to the third.
Yeah.
I swear to God, this is number 3 for me, but that line is horrible. But it's way more competent than Rambo 2. It's an actual continuation of John McClane to some extent, with like him and Holly being in love, which was nice, and he's no longer like, I fucking girls at every angle. However, they do take a step back by still giving what was his name? The officer who eats Twinkies.
Oh yeah.
They still take a step back by having the character just keep eating Twinkies back at the station.
Because that was the whole thing.
Yeah. But either way, it's still it's a fun movie. It had everything going against it, especially being a follow up to Die Hard. And for the most part, I would say this movie is still enjoyable, and it's a good sequel. You know. All right, so let's move on to number 3. And number 3 for me is actually going to be Transporter 2. The reason why this beat out Bad Boys 2, for example, they're both set in Miami and they're both saturated to hell. But the difference is that Transporter 2 is like an hour 33 and Bad Boys 2 is like 2 hours and like 30 minutes or 20 something. I swear it's such a long movie.
It's not 2.5.
And there's so many scenes that are just in there that don't need to be in there and that are, cut way too long. Whereas in Transporter 2 is tight. It is a tight sequel. It is a continuation of the character. It's not necessarily a continuation of the Transporter world. But you know what? It doesn't care about that. It's just here to entertain you, to give you cheesy bad guys and have Jason Statham kick some ass. And is it the best choreography on the list? It's up there. It's not better than Drunken Master. But it knows what it's doing and it's going for it. And if I'm watching a sequel to a movie that was a kind of an okay action movie, but it had an interesting world of the Transporter world, like this is a good sequel. It's fun. You want a little bit more out of it because of the story, but only because it's entertaining you so much, I think. So for me, it's top 3 for sure. Transporter 2.
My number 3 is actually the other Miami movie, Bad Boys 2.
There we go. Perfect.
I don't remember it being that long. It didn't feel that long, and that might be kind of why I'm ranking it so high. I'm not going to say that I like Michael Bay or his movies, but I'm not as opposed to that like choppy editing. There were moments where like I really lost place of where I was in the scene, but I've seen movies cut worse for sure. I've seen movies probably with bigger budgets cut worse than that movie, so I'm not going to ding it too hard on that.
Yeah. It's honestly a preference at this point because I think both these movies are good. Just for me, Transporter 2 just knows that it knows that it's cheesy, whereas in Bad Boys 2 still has like serious moments. They try to have those like heartfelt moments, and it works, but it's still like Michael Bay doing it.
I know, and I feel like I think the big thing that got this up to number 3 was like Will Smith, Martin Lawrence, their dynamic. Side characters were kind of hit or miss.
Gabrielle Union's character is good in the sequel.
She's good, yeah. Her motivation sucks in the landmine.
But this is a great example to talk about these two movies because the bad guy in Bad Boys 2 is horrible.
Yeah.
And I think the bad guy in Transporter 2 is like perfect.
He's not amazing. He's perfect for that that story.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to number 2. And this is going to be interesting. Let's see, because if we both have the same thing,
there's only 2 movies left.
There's only 2 movies
listed.
left. So what is your number 2?
My number 2 is The Raid.
Okay, my number 2 is also The Raid. Too.
Okay, so
all right,
let's talk about The Raid.
Yeah, I mean, The Raid 2 is a fantastic sequel. It's one of those interesting sequels on this list because they wanted to tell the story originally, but they didn't have enough money. So they simplified the story. They kind of wrote a new story, but took elements of the second one and tried to put in the first one. And then based off the success from the first one, they were able to then combine that bigger story that they wanted, but also make a continuation out of it. Now, the character Rama, does he really change or grow and adapt? Not really. He kind of just gets thrown into a new situation and has to leave his wife again. But overall, this is great filmmaking, and this is good storytelling, and the villains were interesting. And overall, it's just, this is what you want in not just an action movie, but an action movie sequel.
That's like the one thing I'll ding it on that they keeps it from getting number 1 is there's no character growth between movies. He's still just the same character. But like we said when we were talking about it in that episode, like they put him in the perfect situation for a character like him. Which is he's got to punch his way out of it. So that's what he does, and it's fantastic. But yeah, like you said, it's just solid all around. What were unfortunately, I can't really like with the bad ones, there were like scenes or moments that really stuck out and like for why I put it so low on the list. This one, there's not really any big moments that stick out to me. But it was just it was all around like just I remember it just being pretty solid.
Well, one of the reasons why it's so much higher on the list than the rest of these sequels, even though they might have similar beats between them, is because of how they go about executing it. So every sequel is going to have multiple bad guys, but the difference between this one and those other ones is that they introduce the bad guys in like a fun way. Like when we introduced those 3 new henchmen with the baseball bat and with the Hammers girl on the train, and then with just Smiley who fights, like that is just a trope of just raising the stakes for our protagonist, but they kind of know that and they're just kind of having fun with it. It's a very confident sequel. And I think that there's a lot of more memorable fights in that movie alone and in that franchise than all the movies on this list collectively. Maybe just like special honor or notice to Drunken Master franchise. But yeah, I mean this is top shelf, and I really hope that they end up making a Raid 3.
That'd be nice, yeah. I think part of the reason why it not necessarily bleeds together, but I think it just is like one of the more cohesive movies on this list.
Yeah. Well, it balances things better.
Exactly.
I think, like,
yeah.
even if there's funny moments even in the Raid 2, but they just tonally understand how to tell that story. So you can have intense moments, you can have fun moments, you can have ridiculous moments, and then you can even have like little kind of dry comedy moments, like, you know, between characters and stuff.
But they ease into it. They do the complete opposite of what Bad Boys 2 does.
Oh no, absolutely. All right, so now it's time for number 1, and at the top of this list I said I was going to make a guess, and my guess was that we were at least going to get 2 right. The worst sequel we were going to say was the same, and then the best sequel. We actually got 3 right, so I was kind of wrong. But
well, 3 the same.
Yeah, but number 1, Lethal Weapon 2. Yeah, so this is the best sequel on the list. This is what we started the list with. You know, I mean, we just kind of talked about tone with the Raid 2. This movie knows what its tone is. In fact, I think it masters it. This is one of the few movies on the list that is better than the original.
Yes.
Right? And it doesn't have to be that to be the best movie on this sequel list, but it definitely doesn't like hurt.
Yeah.
Right? Not only is there actual character continuation and then like growth given to the characters, but it's a better action movie. There's the villains are actually good. You know, and you got, I mean, by good, I mean that like they're funny and they're silly and they don't logically make any sense, but they know what they're actually threatening. They're taking out cops. They have diplomatic immunity, and they killed Riggs' wife, right? So it not only continues the story, but it elevates the first one because it contributes something to the backstory of these characters.
Exactly. You have amazing villains. You have character growth that they are consistent about, that they are clear about, that they are like proud about. They're like, yeah, these characters are going to grow and they're going to change, and like we're not going to be afraid to do something like that. Yeah. And it's really refreshing when you go back and see all these other action movies not do that. You have the toilet scene.
The toilet scene's great.
Is great.
It's a great scene.
Probably one of the best scenes on this, like from any movie on this list. You have the nailed him moment.
Yeah.
Where he's literally just providing commentary on someone he just murdered.
There's a lot of callbacks in that second movie as far as things that they reference and things they bring back. Mm-hmm. I remember that we talked about in that episode.
They weren't necessarily as clever, but like that's such like a...
No, but they were nice because they were just like little...
Yeah, they weren't distracting.
And then obviously I think that the best line of dialogue on this whole list is going to be...
You fold up your tents and get the fuck out of my country, and I won't do anything to you. I'll leave you alone. Because if you stick around here, I'm going to fuck your ass.
You know, that's... If that's not, you know, not a way to only kick off the season, but to end the season.
Yeah.
Referencing it, I don't know what is, but, you know, and it's just the best example of...
It's not just a sequel done right. It's a sequel that is just like elevates the first one.
Yeah. I said with Escape from LA, it felt very cynical and it felt like no one wanted to be there. With Lethal Weapon 2, it feels like there was a lot more effort put in. It feels like everybody was glad to be back and they wanted to make it better. And they did. All right, so that's our list, 12-1. What do you think? Do you agree? Comment below. Do you love Escape from LA? Do you need to see a doctor? I don't know. Thanks so much for listening to Season 2 of the Back Again podcast. I had a good time watching these action movie sequels. I don't know about you, Drew.
Some of them.
But it was a good palette after kind of doing Disney animated sequels.
Yeah.
But thanks everyone for listening this season. If you like this episode, make sure you like, subscribe, that you comment below. You can listen to these episodes on wherever you listen to podcasts. And you can also watch full episodes on YouTube with video. Just make sure you click the notifications button for updates Special shout out to Neely for doing our intro and our outro song. All right, we will see you next time.
I'm back again.